Okay, welcome back. In today's episode, I got something a bit different, and I'm going to be RGB modding my Amiga CD32. So here's the port that I actually want to replace. I want to get rid of this RF port. Nobody uses RF, and I feel like I can fit a connector in this space. So without any further ado, let's get into this mod. Now this is a PAL unit. I also do own an NTSC unit as well, but I'm going to be modding my PAL unit. Now, a bit of history on this console. It was like early to mid 90s when Amiga released this throughout the world, but we didn't get this console here in the States, so it's kind of rare to have one in the US. So yeah, I bought my original unit many years ago for my collection, but I found this one on eBay about a year ago, and it was listed as untested or for parts or not working. So I bought it, and it just seems to be working just fine. It plays games. It's in nice condition. It even has the factory plastic on the top of the on the top shell. So I don't think this unit was used much. The main reason I bought this was because it was relatively cheap, and I figured that maybe I'd figure it out if it was something wrong with it. There was nothing wrong, but I also wanted the original CD32 controller, which I didn't have one. Mine came with like a third-party controller, and this listing happened to have the original controller, so I bought it and it worked just fine. So back to the mod. Now you saw me remove the top half of the console, which came with the optical drive. Now the optical drive was attached by two ribbon connectors, so be careful when you remove those. And then this RF shield is held down by some flip up tabs and 3 screws. So then once you do that, you can remove the board. Now the board is a little bit tricky because the RCA connectors for the AV ports, they're kind of like grounded, and they're a little tricky to pull out, but it's not too bad. So before I get into this mod, I'm going to look at these capacitors here. Now oftentimes on this circuit, on this board, they're reversed right from factory. So not always. In my case, they seem to be correct. So I'll just test by the negative lead of the capacitors to the ground, and they seem to be correct. So I'm not going to touch them. I'm going to leave them as they are. Now this RF module I need to remove because I want to put up a connector in this space. So I'm going to be removing that right now. So to remove this RF module, I'm going to need to use some flux and a desoldering braid. Now I thought that a desoldering braid would work, and apparently this board is very thick, so it really soaks up the heat. So then I ultimately use my desoldering gun, and even that gives me trouble. So after a few attempts at adding solder and removing solder, I do eventually get it off. So in interest of full disclosure, I actually got the idea to mod this console or the instructions from Retro Game Mod's channel, and it's unfortunate that he doesn't upload anymore. His videos were very informative, so shout out to him, and I hope wherever he's at in life he's doing great, so shout out to him. Also keep in mind that I am not a professional. I never claimed to be a professional. I'm just a hobbyist, and all these videos are just for your fun and entertainment. Now I do mod this console. It does work out, but just keep in mind that this is for my collection. This isn't a service that I'm going to sell on eBay. This isn't a service that I'm going to provide anyone. I think this is probably amateurish, but I like the way it turned out. I thought it was pretty neat, and if you do like the way I did it, then that's cool too. So in this shot right here, I'm actually going to wiggle the RF module back and forth. Now I'm not putting too much pressure on it. I'm just using 2 fingers, and I'm just wiggling it back and forth, trying to break it free from the last bit of solder that's left on these anchor points. Now this is the same technique you have, similar to when you have like a soda can and you're trying to break off the tab. You flex it back and forth, and it eventually does come out. Now with a bit of alcohol, I'm going to clean off the leftover flux just to see if I did any damage to the board, and it doesn't seem like I did any. So this process so far is 100% reversible, and actually this whole mod is going to be 100% reversible if I really wanted to. So I got this little D-sub-9 connector, and it's actually a screw mount, so I can actually just feed my my signal lines through it and just screw them down. The only problem is the bottom of this connector has a lot of points on it, and I don't want them to short the ground or just poke through the solder mask and then short out, so I'm gonna file them down. So yeah, it looks kind of crude, but just bear with me for a second. So yeah, I'm just lining it up more or less. I'm not yet gonna solder it down, or I'm not gonna anchor it down yet. I want to solder it to this point here, and so I have to remove some more of the solder mask, more or less in this fashion here. So in order for me to solder this connector down on that one point there, I'm going to have to remove some of the solder mask. So of course I do want to prevent shorting, and so I'll lay down some electrical tape, and I'm actually going to carve out the points that I want to anchor. So right here in the next shot you can see under the connector all the points are cut out. Now here is just where I want the port to live, so it's not anchored in. Now it's anchored in. I know I'm skipping a little too fast. This process I had to do twice. So I anchored it in 2 spots, and this third spot here, it just wasn't going to happen. There's not enough through hole there, and it's just not a good anchor point. So I held it down in 2 spots. I don't think it's going anywhere. Plus I'm not going to use the force of Thor to plug in and remove the connector. Here I'm just seeing if any of my points are short to ground, and it seems like everything is fine, so this connector is okay. So I know this is kind of crude and I'm moving kind of fast, but just to explain what I'm doing here, from the bottom right to the top in this shot, that's red, green, and blue. So what I have is a 75 ohm resistor attached to the negative end of a 470 microfarad capacitor, and then I'm going to run it to my RGB encoder. So I know I heat shrink tubed everything, so I don't think anything's going to short out, so I don't feel like it's at risk of ruining anything. I know this is where a perf board or a better way might have been more desirable, but this is the way I chose to do it, and I feel like it's okay. So right here what I need to do is I need to add a 100 ohm resistor to the RGB switching voltage. So conveniently enough, this surface mount resistor on the board is right there, and it has 5 volts, so I don't have to run a long wire or anything. So right next to the RGB in the middle between the switching voltage, that one actually is composite video. So I did the same thing, a 75 ohm resistor with a 470 microfarad cap. So right now I need 12 volts for the power on switching voltage, which is really not necessary here, especially here in the United States. In Europe, some TVs will detect the signal and they'll switch over to your SCART input. Obviously we don't have TVs with SCART inputs, but I'll just add that anyway just for the fun of it. So for the power on switching voltage, you actually have to add a 1000 ohm resistor, so that's what I'm doing right now. So I did add some heat shrink tubing. I didn't get a great shot, but you understand, it's just heat shrink. So next I need audio. So in this shot, the capacitor on the left side is actually the right audio, and the capacitor on the right side is the left audio. So the board is upside down in this shot. So the purple signal wire is actually right audio, and the green signal wire is left audio. The blue middle wire, that's actually just the ground, and in Retro Game Mod's video, he made a good point. You don't really want crosstalk or any interference among the 2 signal wires, so it can't hurt to have that extra wire there. So on the other end of these signal wires, I do need 75 ohm resistors, so I'm going to add some heat shrink tubing and add the resistors right now. I know this shot isn't great, I'm just adding a resistor to the end of a signal wire. Keep in mind, for heat shrink tubing, you want to lower your hot air station to about 100 Celsius, just so you don't melt the heat shrink tubing. So here's the RGB encoder, which I'm going to be pulling red, green, and blue, and composite video. Now some people pull composite sync, and I know that the OSSC, there's some incompatibility issues for some reason. I'm not sure, but in my case I'm going to pull composite video from this chip, and in the end of this video you'll see the results. So the brown wire is actually red, the red wire is green, the orange is blue, and the yellow is composite video, if you're going to refer to this video. So I did touch it up a bit off camera, and it doesn't look great, but it is making a solid connection and nothing is short. Soldering signal wires to small chips like this, I'm still getting used to it. I'm not the greatest at it. These chips look pretty big on camera, but in reality they're really small. So just keep that in mind. It might seem easy, but it's quite tough, at least for me. So I placed some heat shrink tubing around these signal wires, and now I'm going to solder them to the capacitors. Now from the left to the right of this video, the left side is red, the middle one is green, and then blue, and the capacitor all the way to the right, that's composite video. Now I could have used a small little perf board to hold all these capacitors and resistors in place, but since the leads on the negative ends of the capacitors aren't too long, I don't feel there's much slack. They shouldn't bounce around. So now I need ground. So I took two pieces of 20 gauge wire and joined them together, and then I'm going to split them in between, because my board here has a dedicated ground, and also I'm going to use pin 7 as a ground. So now they'll both be tied together. So when I was soldering the ground here, I didn't get a good shot because my shot was off center, but here's what it looked like when I was done. So here you can see that my ground actually forks two ways, and on the red lead of the ground there, generally ground isn't supposed to be red, but in my case here it doesn't really matter. I don't care too much to color code this correctly, but my red lead on the ground is tied to the audio ground, so that's why you see that blue wire attached to the red lead of the ground. So here in this shot I'm actually trying to get right audio into pin 8, and pin 6, that's left audio, it's already in place. So now I need to assemble a power supply because the one that came with it is incompatible here in the States. So I got this power supply off AliExpress, and it's perfect because it can convert 110 volts AC to 12 volts DC and 5 volts DC. So this is exactly what I need. So I also have this 4-pin DIN connector. I think this is a DIN connector. I'm not quite sure what it's called. But I need that and two old power supply cables. Now these are thick, heavy duty gauge wires. So one cable has both ends clipped, and the other cable I'll have to cut off the female end. So now I gotta solder up this DIN connector. So this is the side that I soldered to, so keep in mind that the other side goes into the console. So if you're using this video for reference, the bottom right pin, that's ground. The blue wire that's on the top right is 5 volts, and the 12 volts is the yellow wire that goes to the top left. So I already heated up the heat shrink, so now I just have to push the connector into this crimping spot, and this is what it looks like all crimped up. So I'll just reassemble the head of this connector, and that should be good to go. So remember, the blue wire, that's the 5 volt, the middle one, the brown wire, is the ground, and the yellow wire, that's 12 volts. Also quickly, I'd like to mention that yes, there is a ground for both 5 and 12. You don't really need to use both because on the console side both grounds are tied together, and on this power supply both grounds are also tied together. So it's just a common ground. You don't need to have two separate wires for ground. So I have an old monitor cable here. Now this is heavy duty gauge wire, and I'm going to use this for the AC side of the power supply. So I have three color wires here. Now in AC circuits or AC, the black wire is usually the live wire or the line, and the neutral wire is the white, and then the earth or the ground is the green yellow wire. So here's a word of caution. Now this is very serious. When you're wiring this up, you do not want to plug it in and then wire it up for whatever reason. Even if you're fiddling around with this, you want to unplug it. Also, you don't want to leave this exposed on your floorboards or in your house, especially if you have small children or pets, because if they touch it, they can lose their life. Even someone who's familiar or skilled or professional can just overlook it and not realize it in the middle of the night, walk across the floor and step on it, or even just grabbing to move the power supply somewhere else, and they can get zapped or buzzed. AC current is very different than DC current, so just keep that in mind. That's a strong word of caution. I recommend that you enclose this power supply in an enclosure that's safe. So here I've been just testing for continuity to make sure nothing is short, and everything seems to be fine. So I'm going to plug this up and see how it turned out. Also, I just want to note that I did create the power supply first and made sure that the console was working before I actually did the mod. I didn't want to mod the console and then fry the system with a bad power supply. That would be a waste of time, and that would really suck. Now I did wire up a SCART cable, but because of a bad SD card, I lost the footage. I also lost a few projects on that SD card. Look at this schmuck. But yeah, it seems to have sound and a great picture, so it seems to be working just fine. So let me close this console up and test it with a few games. So on the inside of this RF shield, I left myself a diagram so I can know later on down the line if I need to service this console, I'll know exactly what I did. As for the old RF module, I don't really want to put it in a parts bin because I might lose it, and I really don't know what to do with it. So there's a spot on the inside of this console that it's unused space, so I don't really want to make sure that it doesn't bounce around or short against anything. Even though this whole thing is enclosed, I did use a piece of packing tape inside, and I wrapped the RF module and I taped it to the inside in a spot that won't really obstruct anything. So here's the final result. I think it came out pretty good. The port is perfect. It might just be up a bit, like it might be sitting higher than usual, but that's just because my adapter board had a PCB as well that added additional height. So here's the cable. I wired this up. Obviously I lost the footage, but what I did was I bought a SCART cable with two heads on it, and I cut one head off, and then I just wired it to the same spec as my output on the console. So now finally we're getting to the end of this video. Let's test it with some games and hopefully everything still works. So my OSSC was having trouble syncing the signal, or something was going on, but it eventually did work. This is 4x speed here, and it took like 30 seconds or something like that for an image to show up. And the game fires up, it reads discs. The image is perfect. I mean, there's not really any interference that I can see. I know the TV might cause like a gridding effect or some effect. That's just the video camera and the screen. In person, the image is perfect. This is actually a really good game to show off because the image is very vibrant. It's like a very cartoony game, so it shows off a lot of colors. it's really hard to play these games with one hand, so just bear in mind this is just to give an example of the picture. It's not really to show off my video gaming skills or anything. So this video is a bit different. If you did like it, please let me know in the comment section down below. If you believe that I should have did something differently or I could have did something a different way, please, I'm all for critiques. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to this channel. I know I post a lot of videos on repairs. This one was a mod. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thank you for watching.